Well, missed my opportunity again, I think, to go live on Instagram, but you know, okay. All right. Well, we are live, so
Oh,
thank
so
you,
you got
everyone.
me with the stuck look with being live like that.
Yeah,
That's
we're
crazy.
live. I'm just here, just chilling and vibing. But no, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in for yet another enlightening and elevated conversation with the Journey with Love podcast. Again, this is an elevating platform. So, in this space, we will discuss topics that are healing. You know, my goal is to help us heal as individuals so that we can add to the collective. And the purpose is to bring on different guests who we can have enlightened conversations with. We're taking a journey to enlightenment in a sense. And the best way to do that is to renew our mind. So we ask the tough questions, we talk about the tough topics. And yeah, so we do have our guest, Dr. Love Jones, with us today. Welcome back. And our topic today is sexual quotient, exploring sexual intelligence. And this is kind of a spinoff from the last time that we were on the podcast together. And we were discussing, I think it was emotional intelligence, and we kind of shifted into discussing sexual intelligence. So we said, let's have an episode around this and see what we can bring awareness to. I do want to put a disclaimer out there that this may be, a little triggering, as we will touch on some sexual trauma, and also that we are not doctors. Okay, so if you need, we're just here having again enlightened conversation. So if you need counseling or therapy, there is no shame with seeking help. If you need resources, my inbox is always open to assist you in that area. But let's go ahead and get started on a hot topic today. All right, um, Dr. Love Jones, if you want to again let the people know where they can find you at, and let's talk about it.
All right. Well, for starters, you can find me you can find me on IG with this same tag. I am underscore Dr. Love Jones. You can find me anywhere with that. You can find me YouTube, TikTok, all those places. I'm actually in a space where a lot of content is coming. I've been recording stuff. My podcast is coming up. It's
Good.
coming out soon. Well, so I'll be releasing the episodes very soon. So make sure y'all following me. Make sure y'all connect with me, so y'all know all that that's coming.
Excellent. Excellent. So let's explore sexual intelligence and what that looks like, Dr. Love. So if
Hmm.
you can tell us, what is sex?
What is sex? All right. So should I give like this the basic everybody definition of sex, or should I go esoterical? You
Well,
know.
give us the practical version first, and then
All right.
into the esoteric.
All right. So part of sex is damn. I didn't expect to go practical. All right, so practical. I think we all know what sex is from a practical standpoint. It is the it is the interaction between two people on an intimate level, right? It's That's the way I look at it. It's the physical interaction with two people on an intimate level. That's like the best basic definition I could give for describing what sex is from a practical standpoint. From an esoterical standpoint, it's sacred energy exchange.
Mm,
SEX, sacred energy exchange. When we think about when we think about sex, right? It's the best way to understand is that you're not just it's not just a physical experience.
mm,
It's a experience that can affect you emotionally and very well spiritually. And anytime you're dealing with spiritual energy, that's sacred energy. And through having sex, you're not only just having a physical experience, but it's also an experience that your spirit is connecting with each other with. and that's how sacred it get. Now, let before we go here, let's set this boundary right here. Sex is not just intercourse.
All
I
right,
think
break that down for us.
most times when we think of sex, we think about intercourse. We think about the intercourse of the act. But when you talk about sacred energy, when you start to exchange energy, it doesn't have to require intercourse. You don't need intercourse to create what they would call um what was it called? Damn, I went I'm running blanks right now. Um what they call it? A soul tie, right? Very common term. A soul tie can genuinely happen when you are in deep conversation. I'm not talking about just this typical conversation. I'm talking about that deep soul conversation where you kind of bind your energy with someone else. Do that through imprinting. When you start to have those conversations where more felt than talked of than anything, like you're really having this real deep in it conversation, that's what creates sex, right? So way we need to look at sex is the physical act is just the expression of what's internal, right? How I feel about you, whether it's just for that moment, how you feel about me for that moment, we're exchanging that vibe. The act is just the best way to exchange what we feel for each other.
You know that's where it gets that's where it gets deep. Okay,
Yeah,
so let me bring this one
I did
here.
say I was going esoterical at the
Yeah,
I get
yeah. Okay, so you stated that the physical act of sex itself is a manifestation of how we are feeling internally. Is that what I heard you say?
absolutely. It's the act. I would say it's the act on how we exchange how we feel internally. So whatever we feel inside of us is expressed through sex. So that's that's the deepest way for me to show how much I'm passionate about you. That is the opportunity right there to show you how much, because think about it, right? At that moment you're naked, and I'm not just talking physical. You're naked, period. This is a full naked experience, right? The
Mhm.
moment that you're not fully naked, the sex become a lesser version of what it is, and all it is now is just a physical act without the emotions, without the vulnerability, without the trust, without all these things. It's just now a physical bodily act. But when you really get deeper into it, that's the where the exchange happens. So again, you can have um I know what I'm about to say, and this is I'm about to get, you can have intercourse without having sex,
Go on and break that down.
because intercourse is just an act. But if there's no energy, there's no sacredness, there's nothing. If all it is just a physical act, then that's what it is. Of course, they will describe that physical act as sex because that's what we've been conditioned to do. But the truth is, there's no exchange. Like, think about it. Do you think porn stars have sex, or they having intercourse? Right? When we think about, no, we're not talking about making love, because love that's a different level of it too. But I'm gonna get to you real quick. So when we think about the physical act, right? All we're doing is just having a physical expression of each other, but there's no energy exchange. We're not exchanging energy. So now that act has been titled sex because that's just the way the world runs. But if you really take a deep dive and think about this, is this: if all I'm doing is just putting what I am inside of you, that's just an intercourse. That's not really sex until there's a level of vulnerability that comes with it. There's a level of nakedness that comes with it. It's that. And oftentimes there are a lot of times where that act is being done, whether it's a man or whether it's a woman, they guard is up. And you have to ask yourself, is it really a sacred energy exchange, or are you just passing time?
I'm looking up a word real quick
I
because
know.
I'm with you, right? But okay, so I'm with you. Intercourse, though, the word itself, intercourse, you're
Yeah,
entering into a course when you have these exchanges. And
that's
so
a
when you
fact.
say that you can have sex, excuse me, you said you can have intercourse, but it
And not
not
have sex.
necessarily be sex. And I guess I'm saying I disagree with you in that sense
Okay.
because as you say, we can do an act and there be no energy actually being exchanged through that act. We're just physically just doing something. We're just humping in a sense, right? There's no sacred energy in that sense. We're just here to get our rocks off.
Yeah.
Versus every time you enter into a woman, we are entering into a course, and there is going to be some kind of
Of the exchange.
biological exchange or even spiritual exchange in a sense, when you enter into that course. So that was the only part that I was like, I don't know
Yeah,
if I can the other way.
and that's always going to be contentious to Greek because here's my thought process, right? I
Hmm.
always say there's sex workers out there who does this for a profession,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
I and especially if you go into the porn world and all of that. So a lot of times that's literally just an act. It's not really a energy. It's not really love. It's not really personal. It's not really nothing being done.
Hmm.
It's more so just this physical expression of each other, right? So now, here's one thing I can say: we could agree or disagree on how every time we do something is their exchange. That's something that could be this. That's a good conversation there,
Hmm.
and I don't think there's a right or wrong perspective
Right.
on that, right?
Hmm.
But the purpose of me making sure that is that it's just to ask yourself, right? When you are engaging in the act, where's the exchange? Because when we think about the bodily foods, absolutely, it's a bodily experience, right? No one is questioning that. But if my mind is on something else, if my energy is somewhere else for whatever reasons, if that's the case, then in all reality, how are we how is there exchange? That's kind of my thought process. But again, you're I can understand anybody who would disagree with that because to me, that's not something that's not a hill I'm willing to die on, if that
Right.
makes sense. Right?
Okay.
That's just a theory of mine.
Well, let's touch on what Brandy says here, that's why kissing is personal, because I've actually heard that a lot. Like people are more willing to give up their body, but when it comes down to kissing, that's what's considered to be more sacred and personal. What do you say about that?
I agree with that because the truth is, again, that kissing is an intimate act, right? You know, like when we think about the when you kiss someone, that's kind of like that's very personal. And even kissing could be, because some people just kiss willy-nilly, depending on culture, people don't want to do that. But when you really have that kiss with someone, that for one, when we think about kissing, right? A, a, a good kisser is somebody that that's right there is how you determine what this experience is going to be from a course, because a really good kisser can really get things going,
Okay.
because that is the more that's the and this is what I learned from a woman telling me is that moment when you dealing with a good kisser, that's the opportunity to develop that chemistry from a sexual standpoint that could determine whether this is going to be a real deeper experience, or is this just going to be the 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 course? Are
Okay.
we just running the course in this?
Right.
So are we going to run the course, or are we deeper exchange? So kissing is definitely it. I have to agree with Brandy. She says kissing exposes emotions and feelings. That's exactly what it does. It's that moment. You could tell a lot of how a person feels about you in that moment. Let's make clear we understand in that moment.
Okay. In that moment.
In that moment. Because the truth is this: a person could be talking about how much they're attracted, how much they like, and how much they got going on with you. But then when they kiss you, it's like, that 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 kiss could determine whether it's real or not. But a person
No.
could be but a person could downplay the situation, but then when they kiss you, it's like, ooh, you felt that in your soul. You felt that right there at the bottom. That's how you determine at that moment how that person's really feeling about you.
Okay. So, with that being said, I want to touch on a comment that I made a post on social media earlier today, where it asks, why do, let's see, it says, why do men lose interest in women after sleeping with them? And I love the response that Simone gave. And she says that it's literally a hormonal thing. When men meet women, their body releases dopamine and gives them a high feeling and may include more emotional thinking and some delusions. But after sex, their testosterone levels increase, bringing them into more of a reality state, and they are more logical again. And so I wanted to bring her response up to that because, like you mentioned, in the moment, it is that kiss that lets you know, if there's this chemistry there, I guess is what we're calling it here. But if it's just driven by dopamine and the natural chemicals of our bodies, then it's still not really real in a sense. Like, to me, I just think that we've diluted sex, and it's not as sacred as it should be. So I've always been a little divided on that whole kissing is more personal than actually having sex. I've never been much of a kisser myself, but then again, I was with my ex-husband for 25 years and he smoked, so that could have been a thing. So so I
Again,
don't have much say in that field there, but yeah.
but see, so here's where I would go with that, right? You There's a point. Everything is Nothing is absolute right here, right?
Right.
We
Hmm.
only giving you a perspective based off who I'm giving you a perspective based off my experience. You giving based off yours, and experience
Right.
is not just what you personally done. There's what you've heard, what you witnessed, all
Right.
the other, all the
Yeah.
above. Yes, sex is a very diluted act in a person, but nothing is real. So let's make this clear: nothing is real except for that current moment.
Okay.
Because here's the reality, right? The past already happened. The future hasn't happened. What's happening is what's happening.
Okay.
And the more you're in that moment, the
Hmm.
more it matters. So my people, shout out to Simone. Gemini season, we coming.
Yes,
All
shout
right.
out to the queen, to the
so
goddess.
so she gave an amazing answer, right? I
Right.
agree with her the moment, but now the question is this: the problem what I find is that if you are physically attracted to someone on that level that you're willing to go that route, if that person lose interest, it's there's many things that we could go through. And I saw it, I gave an answer, but it's something else I want to add to that, but I waited for this because I know it's gonna come up here.
Okay.
Sometimes what causes a person to lose, whether it's men or women, it could go both sides, is sometimes you might have that exchange of energy, and there's something in that energy that doesn't sit right with you. And that could cause you to lose interest because it's something with that energy that takes you to this place of, nah, this don't feel safe, this don't feel right, this ain't as good as it was. That's where that post nut clarity comes in. because once we release that dopamine, as Simone says,
Hmm.
that's when we're starting to receive the downloads from that experience. And from those downloads, you could determine whether this was worthy of anything, or uh, this wasn't it.
Okay. So, ladies, basically, make sure that you're taking your time and fill this person out before you just jump in the sheets with said person, because that post nut clarity is a real thing for the fellas. So,
Absolutely.
take your time. Make sure that, I can feel somebody's energy without getting intimate with them. So, maybe exercise that ability, that superpower
Facts.
that we all
Like,
have.
first off, before you have sex with someone, you should have a understanding that this person energy feels right. I believe that we neglect our own energy to the point that, because realize this, our spirit has way more wisdom than who we are physically,
Right. Facts.
right? So
Hmm.
when we have this spiritual understanding of who we are, your spirit is already telling you this person is good for you, this person isn't good for you, that person is good for you, that person isn't good for you. Stay away from this person. That's a red flag right there. Your spirit knows this before that person even said a word, before there was ever a conversation. There is downloads that's always your spirit's always, because you gotta look at this. This understand this, right? We have a higher consciousness. And I'm gonna go off I'm gonna go off script. I'm gonna go in the direction, but I'm gonna come right back to this,
Okay.
right? So
Hmm.
here's the reality of this, right? We have, when they say we have, our mind is divided by two parts, is really three parts. We have our conscious mind, we have a subconscious mind, and then we have our super conscious mind. Now, your conscious mind is the active part of your mind. It works like a computer. All the files, all the things that's on your desktop right now, whether you're watching this even on your phone, it's like your conscious mind, because you can access this. Every thought, everything. Your subconscious mind is those deep hidden files that you have to kind of search your computer. You have to do digging. You have to go through different files and services. That's where all the information in your subconscious mind. Your superconscious mind is like your computer with Wi-Fi connection. So when we think about a superconscious mind, is that it's connected to a web of other consciousness, right? And we think about that higher consciousness of who we are, it goes beyond. So when we start using term like downloads, it's usually because there is a super conscious awareness that your mind is operating from, that's coming up with ideas, that's coming up with a thought. When you have that gut feeling about something, that is a download that's coming into you, that it's really your spirit is receiving in that moment, that's making you feel uneasy. When we start to think about all the information that comes from just out of nowhere, it could come it comes from a different source. And when we think about that, that's how our mind really works. So when I say in this word that your spirit has wisdom, is because yes, that super conscious mind is your divine mind. It's the mind that operates from the divinity of who you are. And that's why you're so tapped in. Because we think about it, we call, whether you could call God, universe, or however you design, that's also a divine source. And who we are as human beings, we are resources. We are the aspect of connection from that one source. We are the resources from that one source. So because we are all connected, if I'm really tapped and tuned in, I could, when we lock eyes, that's why they say the eyes is the windows of the soul. Because from that locking eyes, we're exchanging information. We're exchanging different things. And from that exchange right there, we could determine whether, if this person is good for you or this person is not good for you. And understand too, good for you doesn't always mean or someone's bad for you doesn't mean they're a bad person. It's just that what's going on in their life, what they got going on within themselves, might might destroy or create turmoil for what you're building for yourself. So that's why it's important to understand the spiritual aspects of this here. Because if your energy don't vibe right with them, then you should not even get to a point where you're thinking you should even be kissing or going physically, or forget all of that. Whatever idea that you have about life, whatever idea that you're working on, you may not want to tell them, because whatever's going on within them might try to sabotage on a spiritual level what you're trying to work for yourself.
Great point. And that leads me to say or go back to that whole intercourse part of it. When you are entering into this course with the other person, and now you are receiving channels or downloads from this person. Let's say this person is depressed. This person suffers from anxiety. They're miserable. They're just, an asshole or whatever. But anytime you enter into this course with the opposite gender, you are now picking up their channels. So even if the act isn't sacred, which it should be for that very reason that we are exchanging downloads. Like I remember one time, I kind of, shortly after breaking up with shortly after me and my ex-husband split, on this whole healing journey, I've elevated some and I double back. I go back and, we smash or whatever. And afterwards, I felt this need to cry. And it wasn't because it was a bad act. I realized that I had picked up his energy. And, he's a very hurt man. He may not express it outwardly, but he's a very sad person internally. And I picked that energy up. Now, this is mostly because I'm elevated in consciousness now. So I read energy like nobody's business. But it was in that moment that made me realize that, oh, yeah, we've been taking this sex thing a little way too lightly, because energies, whether intentionally or not, are being exchanged. So if you're again sleeping with someone who's depressed and now you're wondering why you were suffering with depression, it might be because they've given you that download during this intercourse when you entered into that course with this person. Also, though, Brandy does say that we lie for them sometimes and deny that vibe to be seen, may due to looks or something, but we blind it sometimes. So sometimes we will get into an exchange with someone, just completely ignoring, what their energy is. And maybe it's to satisfy our own flesh, because we've all been there. I know as a single woman, it took, after coming out of a 25-year relationship to becoming single, it was hard to get over that not having sex on a regular basis part. And so it would have been easy for me to just say, I'm just going to go find somebody to knock this out of me real quick, knock me back into alignment. But now I'm elevated in consciousness. I just can't give myself to anybody, I just don't want that level of exchange. I want to be more responsible. Let's get then, with that being said, into how do you know? How do you determine if someone is sexually intelligent, or who is and who is not sexually intelligent?
All right, so it's a great question, right? I think the highest sexual intelligence can be expressed when when whenever we do the exchange is beneficial to you and for me, right? So if you just express poor, and this part of a gross moment, so this is just it. When you got out your marriage, you exhibit poor sexual intelligence,
Mhm.
simply because you was only looking for something that was really not good for you, but you was operating strictly out of ego. You was operating from the body. So you're thinking, man, I'm used to this. I need to fill that void, right? But there was never a void. It was time for you to start to learn yourself and learn your body. Learn what's right with your energy and what's not right with your energy. But when you rush in to just to that expression, then you can possibly exhibit poor sexual chemistry, poor sexual energy. And that's part of the experience of life. And the reason why it becomes poor is because you're not operating from a higher frequency. You're operating from the body. And the question you always gotta ask yourself, are you your body or do you have a body?
Okay. So you've probably seen it floating around then on social media. Like there may be a question of rate, which is most important to you, and it can be looks, finances, romantic, sex, height, and those type of things. And you have those that will put sex top of the list, like dick gotta be good, otherwise don't even talk to me. For someone, is that displaying a low sexual intelligence to have that
That's a
state of
really
mind?
good question. Ooh, that's a really good question. Do you have to ask yourself? Let's unpack that conversation for anybody that thinks sex, or for a woman's words, dick, gotta be this, or from a man's case, the puss gotta be right.
Right.
The when we think like that, what does that mean? Because woman would sit here and say dick gotta be right, but size don't matter, right? Or because there's such thing as too big or too small, or however. That's usually the code word for I just want a fulfilling sexual experience. That's just essentially what it's saying is I want a fulfilling sexual experience. You gotta think about it. Sex is the highest form. We become we become the highest form of enlightenment through sex, through climax, right?
Right. Hmm.
And oftentimes we want to experience that climax as often as we can. And what good is to be committed to someone and you can't experience that? That's like that's like being on a roller coaster and it doesn't take you to the highest. It's like it has that big loop and that big drop, but it doesn't go there. It takes another route and it's just like flat. Like imagine that. Like imagine a roller coaster that does not loop. there's no
It's
there's
just
no
up and down.
turns. All it does
Right.
is just go straight, a little turn here, a little turn back, and you're
Yeah.
done.
No
You don't
climax.
want no peak,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's largely what people saying is that they don't want that experience. But once again, right? How do you go about finding or determining if this person is worthy? That's a different conversation.
Okay.
So what I want people so my main point of that is this, right? When we start to focus on the physical need of this me, I got a heart on you, you feeling a certain type of way, there's this horny determination, right? The moment that you make decisions based like that, that's like going to a grocery store and going shopping while you're hungry. Because when you go shopping while you're hungry,
Mhm.
everything in that motherfucker looks good. Everything, it looks good. The ice cream looks good. That chocolate cake over there, that looks good. This brand new this sausages, that all of these things right here, that food in the kitchen right there,
Yeah.
everything is good, right?
Mhm.
This is the same thing we do sexually. We will go down whatever list of situations we may have actively or inactive and determine whether we can spark something from these situations because you are feeling some type of way. But that's not how you make decisions when it comes to your sexual energy. So when you are making situational, poor sexual IQ is when you are operating solely on the body.
Okay. Fair enough.
Mm.
I was gonna say, because I was gonna talk about how after maybe a year after my divorce. I got
Oh,
a
let me address my brother Rick right here.
yes, yes, go right
Let
ahead.
me address Rick.
Mhm.
90 days is a bunch of BS, right? When Steve Hardy or whoever thought about coming up with this 90-day rule is a bunch of bullshit. I'm telling you, it's a bunch of bullshit. Because 90 days, you could still leave, you could still hit and quit. Like day 91 does not mean this thing is solid. Time is not real in the sense of when it comes to what's intimate and how a person feels internally. Time is only of the physical world. So if you tap in with the right person at the right moment at the right time, it's not taking 90 days. I'm telling you, it's taking whatever it takes for that moment for that person to determine whether is this a situation worth my energy or not. But again, get back to what we were talking about. Is this, are you doing it from a physical experience? Because if you're just thinking about a bodily experience, then all you do is you're just doing is trying to satisfy a need. And that's the worst place to focus on sex, because your discernment level is low, your ability to determine if this person's right for you is low, or you're just operating from this this place of this place of just this unhealthy place. Just like if you go to a grocery store, if you're hungry, you're not determining whether you're on this diet or not, what calories you want to intake, how this food is harmful for you, how this food actually is bad for your gut health. All you're just thinking about is, damn, I'm hungry and all this shit looks good. And then now you spend more money on things you probably ain't gonna eat, all because you was operating from a body and not from purpose.
So are you saying that the waiting the 90 days
I think
is
waiting 90 days doesn't matter. The time does not matter. Focus on what is secure for you. If Because here's the reality, right? And if you are operating from a celibate standpoint, where you're saving yourself for whatever you choose to save yourself, could be marriage, could be just to that
men?
moment where you feel safe or whatever,
Mhm.
then you're probably going to wait more than 90 days. If you're sexually active, you're probably not waiting 90 days. I'm just being real. 90 days does not mean nothing. What it means is really, it's not about waiting the time. It's about determining what's the course you're going to take for this intercourse.
Well, I mean, since you mentioned the whole, Steve Harvey and Think Like a Man deal, because that was his logic in waiting the 90 days that, to be cleared from probation on a job, you got to wait those 90 days, or there's different milestones that you have to go. So why not do that with your body? Wait, at least to make sure that the red flags have been cleared, that, you really are feeling this person. It's just not the dopamine. Like,
Let me,
this is really he's dependable,
let me
all of that.
ask you this question. I'm going to ask you a
He's
question.
consistent. Okay, yes.
Let me ask you this question. If you are CEO of a company, is there a probational period?
If I'm CEO, I mean, if I decide there's going to be one, but
No,
on my
no,
discretion.
no. But let's think about this. Let's think
Mhm.
about this, right? CEOs are not just your average job hire, right?
Right.
You're
Hmm.
not about to find a CEO position on Indeed. Like, it's not just about to happen, right?
Okay.
When you decide to take on a role for CEO, it's because you've done the investigative work on the company and the company done the investigative work on you.
Okay.
If y'all decide at that moment we are right for each other, then there's no 90-day period.
Okay.
It's we're right for each other.
Hmm.
So think about your body and being the CEO of your company, not some job that someone's trying to hire you to determine whether you could fit 90 days and hope that you don't call a no-show, you don't decide to do some BS because they don't really trust you yet. You got to earn your trust. No, treat this as if you've done the vetting, you've done the determination whether this person's right for you, and you see as the CEO or the ruler of this body right here, I'm determining if this situation is right for me now or it's not. If it's not right, whatever. Now, here's one thing I do understand. If celibacy is important for you and you're trying to wait to, like, let's say marriage, right? At that moment, you're not entertaining sex until marriage. So you're not this is so at this moment you're treating your body from a space of, I need to know that until we cross our vows, which is very important to you, if this is worthy of, that's at that moment that I determine, you'll determine at that moment if your body is ready for this, if you're ready to have that exchange. Now, again, that's just intercourse. By the way, let's just realize that there's many ways to have sex without intercourse,
Mhm.
but we have to determine what are those ways of tapping into each other. Because if we do the proper conversation, here's one of the things. And I'm gonna tell a story that one of my homegirls back in New Jersey, she like assisted me, right? She talked about a story where she was dealing with this guy for years. You're talking about probably 10 plus years. And there was a moment of they had an argument, and during that moment, they had a vulnerable moment where that man actually bared his soul to her. At that moment, afterwards, they had sex. She said she had one of the deepest orgasms because of that experience. I say that to tell the story is this: the determination of, yeah, a person can physically get you there. But the moment when you decide to take the seatbelt off, when you decide to just ride this situation for what it is, you're not worrying about, you feel safe, you feel secure. When your walls are down, no pun intended, when your walls are down, at that moment, you're now in a place where you are the most safest. And from that moment, you can go many distances and you can go places where you want to go. Sometimes in your that exchange, in that moment when you're having when you enter in that course, your spirit could just shut you, could build your walls up, and to the point that now, even though you're physically doing it, there's something part of you that's holding you back. And
Well,
at that moment, and not to cut you off, but at that moment, that's when you determine whether this experience, is it really an exchange or a physical act. Because sometimes your own spirit could just say, hell, now you're on your own, buddy.
Yeah, so if you have a track record, ladies and gentlemen, of making bad decisions, you keep picking the same person in a different body, it is important that you wait as long as possible. Don't give in to your flesh. Like that's the whole battle of this life is, are you going to go with the higher self or the lower self? And the flesh is usually the lower self. So if you are known for repeat offenders, again, same person, different body, take your time. There's no rush. If the person is trying to rush you, then they ain't the one for you. But another example, though, of that sacred energy exchange, which the acronym does spell sex. Uh, I guess I can say where I had a situation where there was no penetration involved, but just the intimacy of being in the person's presence. Basically, it was the first time that I had ever felt safety and protection in the presence of a man. Like they set me up to, they catered to me. They, would hold me in their arms and pet me and, just like really allowed me to feel safe and protected for the first time in my life. And I think I was 42 years old at that time. And that experience itself was very healing for me. Like that very next day, I woke up and I was like, man, I need to write. Like I just had this crazy urgency to write, and this poem just poured out of me. It was that super conscious, a divine download, or my soul regurgitating, maybe some old hurt and pain that was inside of me. But it was just that opportunity to be again in that sacred environment where I felt safe and protected, and it was healing for me. So that was definitely sex without the intercourse right there. It was a sacred energy exchange.
There we
So there
go.
we have it.
So, and then we got, because here's what the purpose of your sexual energy is. Your sexual energy is meant to create.
Hmm.
We're meant to create with our sexual energy. Now, the highest thing that we could create within our sexual energy is what? When you when you ask, when you the highest thing we create is a child, a whole being.
Hmm.
That it gets no bigger than that. We could create a
Right.
whole being with our sexual energy. So when we think about when we think about our energy is built to create. So you don't always have to have sex when you are at that moment of what we call horniness. When you have higher sexual intelligence, you know how to channel that into other forms of creation.
Transmutation.
That is called sexual transmutation,
Hmm.
right? And that's where you determine now, all right, I'm not about to sit here and sex. I'm not about to masturbate, not do none of that. I might go and work out. Use this energy to just go out there and just I'm a I'm about to get this gym to work. You could
Okay.
also you could also write. I did a lot of writing of my book from that sexual energy because during that time, for
Because you
majority
were
of the book, not
celibate.
all the book, I was celibate.
Okay.
So it was a lot of energy that I put into that. When I talk about when those who got my book, Process 5, that is called Sexual Energy and Manifestation. That's me talking about based off my physical experience at that moment, right? Of of what I'm talking about. So I developed that understanding of myself
Okay.
just by learning how to not just decide to call out that old thing that
Hmm.
only time you call is when you want to get your rocks off.
That cuddy
I
buddy.
learned
Yeah.
to yeah, you I learned to now determine other helpful ways that we can use this energy and not using it. And that comes with a high level of discernment of self.
Okay. So that was good. That was good tips and advice. Hopefully the people are taking notes when you're in that horny state instead of calling up that old fling who that nigga toxic or that girl is chaotic and destructive. Don't call her. You can go work out. You can write. You can tap into that hobby that you've been wanting to start. Like transmutation of energy is what that sexual energy should be used for, other than spilling your seed everywhere. So those are wonderful tips. Wonderful tips. Now, we started to explore into this topic a little bit last week because we got to talking about sexual trauma and how it affects how we move as adults. And if that has gone unresolved, you may not even realize that, because men and women, of course, think differently about sex. And men in our culture, it is taught that men gotta have sex. It's like a necessity. Like we don't preach or practice self-control. You're the man. The sooner that you lose your virginity is just like so many negative connotations that go along with sex as a man. To me, and so I've heard many of stories from men who speak about their sexual trauma as a child. Maybe it was a babysitter who forced them to give them oral sex and they weren't but 8 years old, or even just to have sex in general and they weren't but underage child. Maybe a male. I'm speaking about men because we speak mostly about women being experiencing sexual abuse, but we hardly ever touch on men experiencing sexual abuse. And so I've heard stories from several different men in regards to again, maybe they were touched by another male cousin or family member, an uncle or whatever in their family. But sexual abuse, I think I read a statistic earlier, is 1 in 4 for girls and 1 in 6 for boys. And so my question is some introspective work that I had to do for myself. Because again, I was in this space of I don't see how people can go without sex. Celibacy could never be me. Like, I was that girl. Like, sex was top of the list for me. Gotta have it. You know what I'm saying? But then experiences would happen, and I had to really evaluate my thought on sex and why do I think the way that I think about sex. I'm gonna ask you the same question, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think about sex, and why do you think that way about sex? I know not everybody's experienced sexual trauma, but a large portion of us have, on some level, experienced sexual trauma. I gave an example on the last episode where a guy was telling me that at 18, fresh out of high school, he goes off to college and he was basically recruited to be a gigolo for all these different women. Like he's having to smash like 8 women at one time. And he's like, well, I enjoyed it. I was an adult. I consented. I enjoyed it. Although there was a point where I wanted to stop, but they wouldn't let me stop. This is what he's sharing with me. I wanted to stop, but they wouldn't let me stop. And I'm asking him, I'm like, okay, you don't see that as an issue? Because for me, that broke my heart to hear that from him. Like I thought if that was my child, I'd be ready to kill me somebody if that were my 18-year-old child. But it's like when he was sharing with me what his ex-wife would say or other women in his past, he would use women like they were meat. You got this great big old placard of a black queen on your wall. You claim you love black women, but yet you use their bodies as though they're some sort of tool just for you to get your rocks off on. There's really no true love behind that. And he wasn't correlating that experience as a child as abuse. And now in adulthood, you are misusing the very same population of women who you say you have reverence for. So again, I
Mhm.
want to employ you all to ask yourself, what are your thoughts about sex and why do you think the way that you think about sex?
I want to touch on that male sexual trauma because honestly, there's not enough conversations on male sexual trauma because oftentimes we will frame our sexual trauma with, we will frame it with, oh, I had fun, or I wasn't abused, I consented, it was cool. Here's where this is comes down to: age has nothing. It won't. In
Mm,
the law, let's look at the law. If you're considered a minor, you can't consent.
right.
There's no concession is consent if you are a minor to adult, right? Now, there's a moral aspect of this as well, because legality, if even with states, there's a age of consent that flows from anywhere from 16 to 19, depending on what state. There's a law. It's not as simple cut dry the way it is. In some states, a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old can get together legally. In some states, that's illegal, right? So that's one thing to know from a legal standpoint. But now here's a moral standpoint, right? If you are, there are kids who were very young who experienced like sexual act from like grown women groping them,
Mm-hmm.
that would touch them, that would rub their titties on them or whatever. Like I was listening to an actor, uh his name is Bobby J Thompson, I think that's his name, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he was in an interview. He was a known child actor. He had movies. He had a sitcom with what's his name, Morgan, Tracy Morgan.
Okay.
He was in Grown Ups, that the little black boy grown in that movie, right? He talked about how when he was kids, women used to say he's adorable. They were let him
Mm-hmm.
touch they ass, they rub the
Mm-hmm.
titties in his face and all of this stuff. And he was like, yeah, I had no problem with this. This is not trauma. This is not. Eventually he got to a point where he said, yeah, that's not right. But here's where we as young boys get really sexually, we come to this point when grown men gets older and now they are sexually disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how this happens. It happens because when you're a kid, we are have these grown thoughts of sex, and we experience them in a way, and some of the ways we experience them creates this place within we don't value it because we were never taught it. There's not enough conversations on telling kids the real aspects of sex. Yeah, they'll tell kids safe sex, wear a condom, practice abstinence. In the case, for the most part, that's the way you could not get disease or not get pregnant, through abstinence. The second way is through wear a condom and all this other stuff. They'll tell you all of that, but no one tells you the value of why you have, or the importance of having sex. You have sex to procreate. This is the number one reason for sex. The number one is to procreate. Now, there's a pleasure aspect, and yes, I get the pleasure. I'm not saying pleasure is removed from this, but the main purpose of sex is to procreate. The second aspect is the pleasure. Now, you have to balance pleasure with creation, right? Because now we're not talking about just a creation from another child. We're talking about from life, from everything around us,
Mhm.
everything. And if you're focusing more on pleasure, then you are not creating what you need to create, which means you are out of alignment of your purpose. And what happens is, as men, we're taught from little boys that sex is a form of conquering. We're taught that if you have sex, that means you're a conqueror. You're the man. You're the king. The man that can get the most women is the man. That level of trauma that's been instilled into us, how we grow up based off our own interactions, especially if you have grown women or a woman that's much older dealing with someone that's much younger, they're not going to have the level of care because in that moment, no one cared for them. Like when you have conversations with men, how are you? For number one, I ask women this: are you speaking to men? Are you speaking to men and asking them how they view sex and what were their sexual experiences like as a child? If you're not having those conversations, then you don't truly understand the root to whatever issue he may be having in his life currently. So, my number one thing that I want everybody to get from this conversation is whenever you're dealing with sexual energy, always think about the exchange. Don't just think about how is this benefiting you or me. Realize that there's a full body exchange that's going on. And when you don't discern the person that you're about to have this exchange with, you could be taking on their trauma. And then now their trauma, you're feeling it. It's not that because you're physically traumatized, it's because you went through something within that person energetic wise that's now traumatizing to you. And trauma lowers sexual intelligence.
Jennifer says that I think we were taught that the sole purpose of sex is to procreate. I think for most girls, probably, not necessarily for the boys. I don't know if the
I was
boys
not
were
taught
taught
that.
that.
I was not taught that. I
No,
was thinking pleasure, pleasure.
yeah,
I was
pleasure.
I was not taught that. No one, because the thing is that's the thing they don't want you to do, right? You think
Right.
about the whole. We don't want to procreate when you're young because
You
you
better
don't
not
already
bring
have
me
a
home
kid.
no babies. I just
We,
had to have that conversation with my
exactly.
son, who I just found out
Don't bring
17.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like don't bring no babies in this
Don't
house.
you bring me no babies home.
You know. So in all reality, sex mainly is the purpose of it is to procreate, but as time and consciousness has been added to us, we found ways to do it, and you find different forms of sexual. And there's a whole like sex is such a. I think a lot of us is only crack the tip of the iceberg when it comes to sex because there's so much different rituals that goes into it. When you think about Kama Sutra, when you think about these other forms of sex and the ways they go about it, how you can have home orgasmic experiences without physical touch. Like there is a whole journey that a lot of us are really blocked from simply because we are only simply looking at it from one perspective, and that's just the physical exchange or the intercourse that we embark on when it comes to with sex. So And so for me, I will always say is this, right? It's important that you understand your body, yourself. Number one, your history matters, not in a matter of this, not for someone to use that against you. We're not talking about that type of history. We're talking about the history of knowing what traumas that you absorbed during that experiences, and how are you going about processing and healing said traumas. If you're not trying to process or go through said traumas, all you're doing is transferring that energy to the next source. And that's right there is low sexual intelligence.
That's it. I want to point out two things here, and probably it's gonna be one because my dang on mind. Procreate. Okay, so trauma. I want to make sure that we're clear because when people hear trauma, they think that it's some grand experience that had to happen, and now a person is just, suffering from PTSD or whatever. But trauma can be the smallest little thing. Trauma doesn't have to be something big for it to have been impactful. And so that's, I
Facts.
think, something else that people don't really hone in on, focusing on what the problem was or where it came from, because it wasn't a great big grand deal. Just simply a young man at 13 being teased for still being a virgin. That's
Yeah,
trauma. That is
yeah,
trauma right there. And that
absolutely.
impacts how they move. So that impacts how they move as adults. So that's what we mean when we speak
So,
about trauma.
so I'm glad you touched upon that. I'm
Yeah.
glad you went there because that right there was me, right?
Okay.
Because I lost my virginity at 16, but
Hmm.
the way I was around the environment, it was like, damn, I was like the last person who has experiences because it's people like 12, 13, or even younger that was having sex. And I'm like the one person like, oh, I'm being told that I'm putting the pussy on a pedestal. That's why I'm not having sex. Like
Right.
I'm having those conversations like, nah, you just ain't getting it, whatever. So there
Yeah.
was a point of time where I was ashamed of having a low body count.
Yeah.
Like I was ashamed of it to the
Yeah.
point that my early adult lives, I used to fudge them numbers. Like
Yeah.
I used to fudge them numbers. But
Hmm.
all of that made me had to look back at myself, and one, I had to be proud that I had sex when I was ready at that moment. Even though that first experience was not the most, that was a traumatizing experience, but it,
Yeah.
like, it wasn't the worst traumatizing. Like I didn't walk out of there bitter, right? I
Right.
wasn't like stripped of my innocence when that happened. But it was just one of those things that made me like, okay, that would never happen. And but like we have to also understand this. Trauma is not what gets done. Trauma is the how it lands from that person's perspective, right?
Right. Hmm.
So you can some trauma helps you grow,
Hmm.
some trauma makes you it goes reverse. So there's a hyper and a hypo when it comes to your trauma. Sex, if you were, for those who were molested or went through sexual a sexual violent act, they a lot of times they become either hypo, which means they're not having sex. Many becomes asexuals because of it, and then there's people who becomes like sexual deviants. They become all they doing is having sex, and that's a trauma response. This is why I say you should never ask somebody what's their body count or shame them because of their body count, simply because are you willing to determine the sexual trauma that they was experiencing? Are you willing to acknowledge that? Because we try to because we live in this world, especially in this idea of shaming women for their body experiences, not realizing a lot of them was operating through trauma. And right then and there, we, that's a level of thing that we are, until we are willing to unpack that within ourselves and within others. We gotta be aware of the trauma that person experiences before we start to judge them on their experiences.
I agree. Show a little compassion and grace.
And guess what? And here's what it is: men experience sexual trauma too. So
Right.
when you see that, oftentimes a lot of women would say, well, a woman can have a high body count and be shamed, but men will be praised. No, the hell we don't get praised for that. Yeah, we might get the homie, little high fives and stuff like that. But when you see a man can't form healthy relationships with women because all he's done is use them as sexual tools,
Mhm.
that affects him long term. When you realize a man can't really develop trusting relationships because they feel like that person's going to cheat on them because that's all they did, that's how it affects men going long term. That they don't become like, if when you are sexual deviants, it's a consequence you play whether you're a man or a woman when you get older, and how it lands, it's based off that person willing to do the work within themselves.
Right. Which we should be striving to do every day. So, but did you, before we get ready to wrap it up, did you let us know how someone can become more sexually intelligent? Like, how do we combat or overcome lack of intelligence?
I'm glad you asked that, right?
Mhm.
Because I believe there's practical steps to develop a higher source, to develop a higher awareness of sexual awareness, and you could become more sexually intelligent. Number one, the number one, and this is the most challenging thing for most people, is become celibate, right?
Mhm.
Detach yourself from the needing of sexual gratifications by extent of physical expression. Don't feel like you need to be validated in your state of whatever you are, whether you're horny or not, by feeling like you need to go and just get your rocks off. A lot of times you make bad decisions that way. You bring people in your life that does not belong in your life through sex.
Mhm.
So right then and there, do yourself a favor and detach from the need from having to have sex to feel validation. Right. Number two, another thing is learn how to use transmute that energy, that sexual energy, into another source. Practice sexual transmutation. That's another way of doing that. And there's techniques to learn how to do that. There's a kundalini thing that I can explain quickly. So when you think about I say I can do that simply. No, I cannot. Because I'm getting the chakras and stuff like that. So no,
Right. There
listen, look out for a book in the future where I talk about
you
this.
go. I love it.
So, all right, but there are ways to transmute that energy. So the one thing you want to make sure you do is focus on doing what you can for yourself so that you don't feel like you are in a rush to do anything. Don't rush yourself into doing something that you're not ready to do. Number Another thing I would say is read books on sexual energy. There are great books out there. There are books that's out there that can help you have a better awareness of your sexual energy. And the last thing and the most important thing to do is heal from your traumas, from your sexual traumas. Just healing from your sexual traumas will spike your sexual intelligence up. Because again, how you determine whether you have high or low sexual intelligence is your ability to create a win-win situation from a sexual experience, how it benefits the person and you. If all you do is focus on their pleasure and you're taken away from you, that's low sexual intelligence. Are you focusing on your pleasure and taking away from them? That's low sexual intelligence. It should be a gratifying experience for both. And if you are not creating gratifying experience for both, whether you're feeling jaded or that person feels jaded, that's a sign of low sexual intelligence, and that's a sign that you may not want to be having sex until you're able to raise that within yourself.
Excellent. All excellent points. And your professionalism is always appreciated. And so I, again, want to employ people based off of tonight's conversation to evaluate what you think about sex and why do you think that way about sex. If you're someone that says you just absolutely could, even a man, because I know again our culture is conditioned to say that men, you gotta have it because you're a man. But even evaluate that. If you have a hard time going without sex, it's a must have for you. Examine that why. Look back over yourself because really it's for, I was going to touch on that word procreation, as being that we are all creators. And I was looking up the etymology of the word pro, and it says in exchange for, in place of, before, being that we are all creators of the most high, or an extension of the most high creator.
Yeah,
So that
we're
also
all
makes you a
creators.
creator. So that energy of procreate can be more than just to have children, is to give birth to many of ideas. Okay, it's not just to be fruitful and multiply, I mean make babies. No, it means to take that energy and birth me many of businesses and ideas, birth those ideas through that sexual energy. Okay.
Mm, mm, mm. And I tell you, like, we gotta. That's when you develop a higher sexual intelligence. Is when you start to allow the ideas to really, really um it allows your ideas to really like evolve so that you're able to now create other things other than just sex. Like, honestly, the again, if you have somebody that you're really on that level with and you have that true connection with, that's when this that's when it's at its best. The moment that you solely focus on just a physical experience, you're robbing yourself from a world where you can create things that can even solve your problems. Here's the conversation. Here's something I listened to. She's not in here, but I gotta salute Kiki because she posted this on her page. There's a woman that says, she stopped having sex because she realized her womb cannot cannot heal wounds.
Her
I
womb
felt
cannot
that her
heal.
womb cannot heal wounds.
Oh, wow, that's deep.
So oftentimes, and this is men, and this is sometimes we tend to do, we tend to think that when we're going through something in our life, we get a good woman in our life, it's going to turn our life around. We think, and sometimes women do the same thing too. We think this person's going to make things easier, think things going to be better. You're not thinking that this person might drag you down into, you might drag a person down because your stuff ain't settled. And what you're doing is bringing them into your world of uncertainty when they was in a better place of certainty. Because with high frequency and low frequency, if they're battled, low frequency always wins. Think about it. Most people who don't believe in anything spiritual is because they're dominated by everything physical. Everything that can make sense in their mind is what's real. Anything that doesn't explain through science or whatever, that's not real. When you are a higher frequency person, you don't need physical reality to validate what you believe is real or what you believe is true to you, right? All you need is a belief or understanding, and whatever sign that you interpret it is a sign, that's what's required. So at the end of the day, what you have to realize, we all have to recognize is this: if you need to heal, that's a good time to take you away from the market sexually, because all you're gonna do is prolong the healing, and you might get with the wrong person that's on the same frequency as you, and now you're regressing in your life. Because here's the reality, right? Every time you attract someone into your space and you have that sexual intercourse with them, it's because you was on the same vibrational plane with them in that moment. So if you had a bad sexual experience, that's because you were attracting that person into your life, and now it sets you back because you didn't do awareness. If you know you're at a low place, then that means you could attract someone to bring you at a lower place. When you're at a higher place, you could attract someone that could bring you to a higher place. That's just how this works. So raise your sexual intelligence by raising your frequency within yourself, so that you don't have to put you could sense a bad vibe from a far away, all because you've been there and you know what that feels like.
Great points. And these are all superpowers of a healed person, guys. So make sure that you're doing your work to become healed, whole individuals so that we can add to the collective. Dr. Love Jones, do you have any last minute words or advice or conundrums for the people before we roll out of here?
I, damn, I gave a lot of words. So I don't think I have no.
You did great.
Wow. No, I appreciate it. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't know where we was going with. I knew where we was going with this conversation.
Mhm.
I just didn't know. You know, this is probably the first time I had a real in-depth conversation on sex,
Okay.
and I'm grateful for this conversation. What I want all of us to do is set a destination path on where you want to be in your life. Period. And you have to, when you have a set point of where you're going and you know the destination, what it has an idea is, you have to ask yourself, the person that you about to entertain sexually, is it bringing you closer or is it taking you away?
Mm.
Do
Perfect.
that. eh, Do that. That's how you determine whether this situation is worthy or is not worthy of your energy. Your energy is priceless. Your energy is powerful. Your energy is valuable.
Yes. Your energy is a currency, a spiritual currency. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And think about it, right? There are people who treat their money better than their energy, their sexual energy.
My
If
my piece is not for sale.
listen,
Woo.
what you have energy. There's no one in the world that has your energy imprint ability.
Right.
You have a rare signature frequency signature. Don't use that signature to sign bad checks.
Excellent. Perfect. I'm gonna give a definition with my out message that I have, which is aware, and it says the definition of that is to be informed, alert, knowledgeable, those and sophisticated, conscious, and cognizant. All of those are fall under the definition of aware. And so this life is a game that we are playing. It's not a game to be played with, but it is a game that you are playing. And I need you all to become aware that you are playing a game. All right. So every experience that you go through is to get you to the next level. If you've played Mario Brothers, you know exactly what I'm referring to. So all of those hurtful experiences, all of those traumas, everything, become aware of the fact that you are playing a game so that we can all elevate to the next level. Okay. But you'll catch us again out here. We want to thank you all for spending this hour and 15 minutes with us. And I'm going to let you go again with Life is a Journey, not a race. Do it with love. It has a sweeter taste. Until next time.
Peace and love, y'all.